I was working on this blanket whilst I was traveling and I ran out of my green yarn. This is where the yarn ran out, and that was how much more yarn I needed. So instead of stopping work, I put in a placeholder. So this is double knitting, so there's 2 layers, but at this point, luckily for me, although it can be done, it was just one colour on one side and one on the other. So now I'm going to replace that with the appropriate colour. I'm going to begin by measuring about 5 times the width that I need to replace, and that should give me enough yarn. I've measured my yarn and found the halfway point, because if I start replacing this yarn in the middle, then I don't have to pull through quite as much yarn with every stitch. Beginning and end are where my fingers are. You can't quite see the left end, but the middle's about here, so that's where I'm going to begin. And I'm going to begin by copying a stitch. So I'm going to copy the pink stitch. The pink stitch goes in here, and I'm going to bring through half of the yarn. All I'm doing is duplicate stitch, also called Swiss darning, but what I am going to do is remove the stitches from underneath. So I am quite literally copying that pink stitch. Take the yarn around there, and now, because duplicate stitch actually adds texture because it's a double layer, I'm going to remove from underneath the yarn as I go. So I'm going to lift that waste yarn, or the temporary yarn, and snip it. And now all I have to do is follow it and pick out the yarn as I go. Now this can be done in all kinds of knitting. You can do it through ferrule, you can do it through, so if you have a sufficient number of stitches that need to be replaced, that it justifies putting in a spare piece of yarn, then I would actually remove the yarn from underneath. I do always start in the middle because that'll give me enough yarn to darn in to the right and the left when you finish. So if you were replacing 5 stitches, you get a yarn tail of the old yarn that was sort of 2.5 stitches long, which should be enough to make a good join. And I'm just going to work stitch by stitch, copying and removing. I'm working with a blunt needle so I don't split the plies, and flicking the yarn out as I go. I'm trying to be very careful to get the right sort of tension on my new stitches, and I'm just going to carry on working towards the left end. There are no bonus points for getting the old yarn out intact, so I'm just going to keep it short and take it out as I go. Really want to make sure I don't split any plies. I've reached the last remaining stitch of the pink in this direction. And all that remains to do at this end is to link these 2 yarns around one another, and then I will duplicate stitch them once on the inside in each direction and weave the tail in between the layers. Now to do the other end. I had about 10 inches of yarn left over at the first end, so I can actually shorten the second piece of yarn because I pulled it through 50-50, so I'm going to take off about 6 inches and work in the opposite direction. There's the tail. Just shows how important it is to actually take it out as you go along. So I covered one stitch initially, and it's very difficult to remove if you don't pick it out as you go. There we are. And now to the far end. I'm leading with the eye because it's just that little bit blunter and helps me to avoid splitting any plies. This technique can be used pretty much anywhere. It would have been possible if there were colour changes on this round, just to follow the yarn to the other side and continue. And you can follow yarn through the weaving in at the back of ferrule if needs be. So anytime you've got a replacement area that would look ugly duplicate stitched and is wide enough to give you enough yarn tail of the original yarn to the right and the left, then this is a more elegant solution. Just make sure that you balance the forces on the yarn tails, the replacement yarn connecting to the old yarn, and then going in opposing directions so the stitches link arms.